We've known for a while now that in HSR patch 4.4, every account will get a free 5-star selector between two of the characters from the Fate Stay Night collab, Gilgamesh and Archer. Given that these are characters everyone will have access to, it's important to have all the information on how these two characters perform and which one will bring more value to your account. So let's go over how Archer has aged since his release, whether or not his Eidolons are worth it, as well as discussing the Doom posting surrounding Gilgamesh, and whether or not he's really equivalent to 3 standard pulls. For starters, Archer needs no introduction for being the king of free-to-play accounts. When the original free Archer was given away, this character single-handedly gave many free-to-play accounts access to endgame due to how powerful he was. Archer was undoubtedly the best hunt unit in the game for a long time, and even now, he's still a very strong unit, with some caveats. First off, while Archer was very strong on release, there were a decent amount of accounts that weren't able to use him due to Archer's heavy reliance on Sparkle in order to achieve maximum potential. A large part of Archer's resurgence in dominance towards the start of Plan Arcadia was due to Sparkle's Nova Flare, accompanied by the free Sparkle selector. This gave almost everyone who wanted to play Archer easy access to everything they required for Archer to start dominating the endgame. As somebody who frequently does endgame clears for my viewers, I could literally feel the collective improvement across the accounts of my community the second the free Nova Flare Sparkle was given out. Archer's impact on HSR's meta can never be overstated. However, there are plenty of other powerful teams that you can build nowadays, and many veteran accounts probably have a decent amount of investment into other teams, such as Remembrance, or Break, or Elation, or Finon teams. There's a decent chance you probably aren't even using Archer for modern day endgame. Because of this, despite how powerful Archer is, he is definitely not in a situation where selecting him will always be an upgrade to your account. Speaking of upgrades though, Archer himself is getting an upgrade in the upcoming patch through the release of Rin Tosaka. I won't go over all of Rin's abilities here, but in short, Rin is a dedicated Archer support who brings the maximum amount of comfort to Archer's gameplay by constantly refunding skill points for him on his own turn via their joint attack, while also providing a bunch of stat buffs to Archer simply for existing. Rin also has the option to be played fully skill point positive while stacking up for a massive nuke of damage every now and then if you ever feel like you need it. Rin is obviously not free like Archer, but if you are intending on investing further into Archer because you're currently using him as one of your main DPSs, then pulling Rin and investing further into Archer with the free selector can be a pretty solid choice. Archer with Rin will be competitive with many of the top teams, especially in scenarios that favor them, but more than anything, the value of this team comes from the fact that both Archer and Sparkle are owned by a lot of accounts because they were both free, meaning you are more likely to have all the puzzle pieces to assemble Archer's best team, thus making the free Archer more enticing. And since so many people already obtained the first Archer, we have to talk about Archer's early Eidolons. Archer's E1 was infamous for being really strong to balance out the fact that he was free, but a lot has changed for Archer since then. While Archer's E1 seems strong on paper due to giving him a free extra skill via the skill point refund, the actual reason Archer's E1 was so strong was because on his release, Sparkle was still a very outdated unit. She was always his best in slot support, don't get me wrong, but Sparkle was barely skill point positive prior to her Nova Flare due to requiring 3 skills to get her ultimate, with each one using a skill point, meaning she would use up 3 skill points per rotation just to refund 4 skill points, which is barely a net positive. Again, she was still Archer's best support just because Archer really relied on gaining skill points at specific times, which Sparkle could still do, but Sparkle's lackluster kit was what really made Archer's E1 shine back in the day. Nowadays, Sparkle's Nova Flare has made Archer's E1 less mandatory. It's still nice for the comfort it brings, but it does not have the same value that it once had, and the release of Rin Tosaka arguably makes this even more apparent. Archer just has such an abundance of skill points nowadays from his tailor-made supports, and he's in a spot where he would much rather have an E1 that directly buffs his damage. Regardless, Archer's E1 does still bring some comfort, especially given that Rin's joint attack essentially always enables him to trigger his E1, so his E1 mainly functions as a way to allow you to use up more skill points on Rin, while still having enough skill points for Archer's own turn as well. However, since Archer's E1 was so infamous back when he first released, there's a lot of people who probably already have Archer's E1. So then, what about his E2? Archer's E2 essentially gives him a Silver Wolf weakness implant on his ultimate, and while this sounds strong on paper, it unfortunately can be a little bit clunky and unreliable. It's a single target weakness implant since it's tied to his ultimate, and Archer obviously needs to launch a bunch of his skills in order to build up energy for his ultimate in the first place, meaning oftentimes a lot of your damage won't be getting the value of his E2 if you're in a fight with multiple different priority targets for Archer to snipe down. Usually that's not the case in Apocalyptic Shadow, where the E2 can be a bit bit more useful in helping Archer just focus down the main boss, but just know that there are a decent amount of scenarios where Archer's E2 can feel a bit clunky to play around due to requiring his ultimate. On top of that, the 20% res pen from the E2 has also lost value due to Sparkle's Nova Flare giving 10% res pen, alongside Rin giving 15% res pen, diluting the value of Archer's 20% res pen. More res pen is still more res pen, of course, so you're not going to complain about it, but it is just sort of interesting that both Archer's E1 and E2 have lost value over the months since his initial release. So, all in all, Archer is a very strong character under the assumption that many accounts have been given the pieces to build a strong Archer team for completely free. For accounts that have been able to put together the Archer puzzle pieces and now have the option to pull for Rin to further upgrade him, Archer's Eidolons mainly serve as a source of comfort in his playstyle rather than being any sort of massive damage boost. But you can never go wrong with smoothing out Archer's gameplay if he's a character that you already have all the pieces for. Thus, regardless of how underwhelming Archer's Eidolons are nowadays, they're still going to be a really good choice for most accounts. We'll go through multiple different account scenarios to discuss whether or not you should select Archer, but first, we have to discuss the value of his opponent on the selector, Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh has gone through a whole roller coaster during his beta, so you'll likely hear a lot of strong opinions about him. His kit went through many different changes, but the end result is that Gilgamesh is like the Rin to Archer's Saber, aka Gilgamesh's main value is being a Saber support, granting her a bunch of buffs just for existing, as well as a joint attack that smoothens out her rotation by giving her energy. He offers a lot of the same things Rin offers to Archer. The reason you'll see a lot of doom posting surrounding Gilgamesh is because he used to be much stronger than the version we're getting on release. But let me clear some of the air surrounding Gilgamesh. Is Gilgamesh a tier 5 useless character? No. Will Gilgamesh struggle to clear content on his release? No. Assuming proper investment and teams, of course. Gilgamesh is by no means a weak character. Gilgamesh is simply a very low value character, which makes it hard to recommend Gilgamesh to people, not because he can't clear content, but because of opportunity cost. You see, Gilgamesh is releasing in a patch alongside two other characters, Rin and Himiko, and both of those characters have teams that are not only more accessible for most players due to the Archer team already being obtained for free by many people, and Himiko being very usable with free units as well, but are also arguably just stronger than Gilgamesh's teams while being very accessible. This isn't because Gilgamesh is bad, it's just because Himiko and Rin are very good and happen to be releasing at the same time as Gilgamesh. Basically, Gilgamesh is just facing some very tough competition on his release. Now, Gilgamesh mainly has two teams where he can see use. Again, the first one is with Saber, who, unlike Archer, requires you to pull for her. You can argue that pulling Saber to use her with Gilgamesh isn't much different than pulling Rin to use her with Archer. Both of their ideal teams require one free character and one banner character. But the difference is obviously the fact that Archer's other best support, Sparkle, was also given out for free. Not to mention Archer's signature light cone was obtainable via a pulling event on his release. And there is yet another pulling event to choose between Gil and Archer's light cones in patch 4.4. In short, players are just much more likely to have a higher investment Archer team already, which is why it makes more sense for most players to lean towards Archer and Rin if they are going to choose one fate pairing to invest into. On top of this, Archer and Rin oftentimes are just the stronger team compared to Gilgamesh and Saber. Obviously, this depends on matchup more than anything else, but the fact that Archer and Rin are the more accessible fate pairing while being arguably stronger already pits everything against Gilgamesh, who again is not weak by any means, but is simply caught between a rock and a hard place. This puts Gilgamesh in a spot where, compared to Archer and Rin, you would only choose to invest into Gilgamesh if you want to show your loyalty towards Saber, and not necessarily because Gilgamesh and Saber are the better fate pairing to invest into. Which, to be fair, I'm sure there are a decent amount of dedicated Saber mains out there, so Gilgamesh is in a fairly straightforward position where he is made for the Saber mains. And if you don't fall into that category, Gilgamesh isn't going to do much for your account. Of course, Saber isn't the only place where you can use Gilgamesh. While there has been a lot of controversy surrounding Gil's performance as a hypercarry, primarily in a team with Mortonak's Blade, Gilgamesh is still strong enough to clear content as a main DPS. However, you could argue this is simply due to the strength of Mortonak's Blade, often teaming up with Ashvale just to wheelchair Gilgamesh even more. To be fair, it's not like Gilgamesh is getting completely carried in this team comp. He does have real synergy with the team, benefiting from frequent actions, as well as reaching the perfect 100% defense thread when paired with Blade and Ashvale. However, at E0, Gilgamesh just isn't outstanding in this team, and isn't even better than just running hypercarry Ashvale with Tribby. In that sense, you could say Gilgamesh is actively holding the team back. If you invest further into Gilgamesh, he will obviously perform better in this team, but the issue there is that the Ashblade team is very likely getting another teammate who will be made for them. Like, actually made for them. Unlike Gilgamesh, who is made for Saber, and just happens to also work with Ashblade. Meaning investing into Gilgamesh for the Ashblade team is just ill-advised when he's sort of on a clock and is destined destined to be replaced. Again, like I've been saying repeatedly, Gilgamesh is not a weak character when it comes to being able to clear content. It's just that there are a lot of factors surrounding him, mainly the power level of other characters, that makes it hard to recommend Gilgamesh. So I think the easiest way to illustrate when you should pick Gilgamesh versus when you should pick Archer is to just go through all the scenarios where your account should pick Gilgamesh. It's pretty simple. Do you want to invest into a Saber team no matter what? If so, pick Gilgamesh, obviously. If your account did not select the free Sparkle and you have no intentions on ever pulling Sparkle on a rerun, then Archer will never be at his full potential on your account, even with Rin, and you can once again consider selecting Gilgamesh instead. If you have the Ashblade duo and you have no intention on pulling any future character that might be specifically made for their team, then you can also select the free Gilgamesh for this team. He's not necessarily better than Tribby, but maybe you also don't have Tribby, or you need to free Tribby up for another team. Basically, select the free Gilgamesh if you already have Saber and you aren't going to have Sparkle and Rin for Archer, aka you specifically just want to invest into Saber. Or select Gilgamesh if you have the Ashblade duo and have no intention of investing in a better teammate for them and would rather just default to slotting Gilgamesh into their team, even if they will probably get a better option. These are pretty specific scenarios. If you don't fall under any of these categories, then I would basically always select Archer, since you probably have Sparkle and maybe even the free Archer from last year, and you don't really have a place for Gilgamesh. It doesn't really matter which Eidolon this would be for your Archer. No matter how underwhelming Archer's Eidolons are, it's still better when compared to a Gilgamesh who will literally be homeless on your account if you have no intention of pulling Saber or stunting your Ashblade team's investment. Again, this is not to say Gilgamesh is a bad character, but he's simply a character that is only recommendable to a very specific subsection of players, as I outlined earlier. For anyone who doesn't have Saber on their account, Gilgamesh isn't going to do much for you in the long term. In general, there's probably a decent amount of accounts that won't see much value from either of these two, simply because you've already invested in other teams that don't require either Archer or Gilgamesh. And so of course, if that's where your account is at, then just select whoever you like more, I guess. If your account already has both an invested Saber and an invested Archer team, and you're basically deciding which of the two you want to keep relevant, here's how I would decide. Are you willing to pull Rin Tosaka for Archer? If you are not willing to pull Rin, and you're essentially deciding between an Archer Eidolon without Rin versus a Saber with Gilgamesh, then I would actually pick Gilgamesh. This is probably Hoyo's main strategy with releasing Gilgamesh in his current state. Gilgamesh and Saber are not necessarily the most broken team in the game, but they are strong enough to where if you already have Saber, then giving the free Gilgamesh to Saber is enough for her to compete with Archer. And suddenly, Archer would require you to pull Rin Tosaka in order to catch up again, assuming you don't already have other vertical investments in Archer's team. It's Hoyo's way of trying to bait pulls into Rin Tosaka. Let me just use this section to remind everyone that Rin and Gilgamesh's banners will last for a long time. Like, probably forever, seeing as the Saber and Archer banners are still here. There is no rush to get Rin and Gilgamesh. Do not pull for them right away if it'll leave you in a tough spot with your pulls and potentially cause you to spend money you'd rather not spend. Be smart, be patient, and don't feel the need to rush your pulls for Rin. Anyway, if you aren't willing to invest the same cost into Archer by giving him Rin Tosaka, and you already have an invested Saber, then this is another scenario where I think selecting Gilgamesh makes sense, even if you also already have an Archer team. In the end, it all circles back around to how much you want to upgrade your Saber. Outside of that, Gilgamesh is not going to see much use on your account unless you're also unwilling to upgrade your Ashblade team with any other character, and selecting Gilgamesh would solely be out of love for the king, which is understandable. All in all, Gilgamesh is not a bad character compared to Archer. He is simply a less recommendable character due to all the caveats required in order for your account to be in a scenario where Gilgamesh is the better free unit. Archer and his team have just been so much more accessible to so many more accounts, and if you don't have Saber, then any veteran account should pretty comfortably select the free Archer Eidolon, even if the Eidolon doesn't do too much. But if your account somehow falls under a different scenario, try asking about it in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer. And like the video if you found it helpful or enjoyable at all. Gilgamesh has gotten a lot of doom posting, and while I think it's true that many accounts aren't going to benefit from selecting him, I just wanted to clear up that it isn't because he's a tier 5 character or anything like that. I'll definitely have more videos covering any future characters, as well as Himiko Nova herself as we prepare for her banner, so consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on that. Thank you so much for watching, and with all of that said, until next time!